everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, Dead Island 2 is out, and apparently it's brilliant.
Dude, it really is. It's surprisingly good. And that sounds very kind of like a backhanded compliment to say I'm very surprised that a game is good. But obviously, Dead Island 2 in particular has had such a lengthy and tumultuous development period.
God, yeah.
Like, it's been 9 years in the making. Allegedly, a bunch of different developers coming on board. A lot of things getting scrapped, a lot of things getting kept. So the fact that this game is out right now, and it's as fun as it is, and more importantly, it's as stable as it is.
Right.
Really, really surprised me. There's a lot to love about it. There's a lot to dislike about it. It's not the greatest game in the world, but it's a very good game, and it's a very recommendable game.
So the thing that I want to zero in on here is that obviously the zombie genre is massively packed. It's one of the most saturated, demographics out there, kind of thing. We did an early access preview hands-on thing for this, and one of the things that stood out was the kind of siphoned off level design that is in the game, and you were saying that's one of the best positives about it. So I think this is one of the most differentiating factors.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people were initially annoyed to learn that Dead Island 2 is not an open world game. Instead, you have around about 10 levels, for lack of a better term, but those levels are big, they're dense, and they're kind of open to exploration. And I prefer that because that gives you a more focused sense of clarity in the visual design. It gives you a more focused sense of clarity in the kind of level design. It ultimately makes those areas way more memorable. So there's only a few duds. Like, this game has too many sewers. It's got two sewers.
No.
And that's too many for me. I'm like, why? When we've got this like lovely opulent version of LA on the surface that is blood-stained, that's got like all of these really cool environmental storytelling encounters, and then you kick me down to the sewers or down to the metro, and I'm like, I could have done with a few more areas up top, please. Developers.
Does it feel like the tile sets repeat when you're in the sewers? There's less like sort of artistic flair even possible in sewers.
There's still the environmental storytelling there, but a sewer is a sewer. I don't like it in Resident Evil. Maybe it's a personal hang-up. I don't like it in Spider-Man. Stop using sewers in games. I don't care if it's like a dark and dingy area that might be good for horror. I personally don't like them, so please, developers across the globe, stop using them. But
quick side note, let us know literally any game that's ever done a good sewer level. I can't think of a single one.
Spider-Man 1 on the PS2, the movie tie-in game. You were like measuring water levels and stuff, and even that wasn't that good.
I was going to say there was the Spider-Man, the PS1 one, when you're going after the lizard.
That was quite cool.
You're still in a sewer.
Those were like eldritch horror like sewers. Those things were like sort of never-ending chasms. Like, they didn't make sense. They were very dreamlike. I quite like that. But going back to Dead Island 2, the best and most strongest part of this game, and most appealing part of the game for me, was the sense of visual design in the levels themselves. Like I said, each location is so memorable, and it feels like there's a real sense of place. It feels like people lived in these houses that you're going to, and each one had its own individual story. I cannot get over the amount of detail that's been packed into each and every one of these locations. It's kind of weird to say. It's honestly almost akin to The Last of Us Part 2's visual design, where you're going to like these apartments, or you're going to these kind of like gas stations, and each one feels distinct. Each one feels like a developer has spent 2 years of their lives working on like this one location. And that feels really cool, because I'm personally, and I said this in the preview, and nothing has changed since then in regards to this, but I'm personally a huge fan of like early days of a zombie outbreak. I love my post-apocalyptic stuff, but I like the idea that the zombie outbreak has just happened, and we've got the juxtaposition of this blood and guts and all of this mayhem juxtaposed against, like I said, the opulence of these Bel Air mansions.
Let's talk about blood and guts stuff. It'd be a miracle if this actually gets on YouTube without it all being demonetized, but we'll see how we go in terms of the clips that we can show. Speaking of blood and guts stuff, let's talk about tone, because one of the things that was front and center of the game's sort of re-reveal was this way more kind of playful, kind of quasi-Saints Row kind of tone, which I think has managed to land. But like, how's the writing, how's the story, how's the characters potentially?
The writing's hit and miss, I must admit. I said in the preview that I was surprised by how much it hit, but unfortunately it did start to grate on me a little bit towards the end. You get like a lot of quips, a lot of really outdated kind of jokes that don't really
Someone get hit in the knee.
Align with that don't really align with my sense of humor. It feels kind of like you're taking slang from 2012 to 2015 and putting it in a 2023 game, which is a little bit of a shame.
How long it's been in development, to be honest.
Probably, probably, right? But the voice acting in particular is really strong. I was playing as a Slayer called Amy, and their voice actor was like incredible. Managed to sell these occasionally dud lines in a very convincing way that endeared me towards the character. I think the voice acting across the board is pretty good. The story has its high points. It's got like this really intriguing mystery to it. It's not just your standard kind of zombie story. It's not just like the same old virus that you've seen before. There is a kind of extra layer to it. It's a little bit rushed. The villains, for my money, come into the story a little bit too late and don't get too much development towards the back half. So it's kind of like you're not playing this game for the story. It is there, but it's more about the world and the kind of mini stories within that world and the characters that you meet rather than the overarching narrative. So it's like, it's not, you're not going to get like The Last of Us storytelling, and you're not going to get like anything like that. It's kind of just on par with the original Dead Island game.
It feels like it's worth pointing out, and this is just kind of a question, but it feels like this is designed to be finished, because when Dying Light 2 came out, obviously there's a whole thing about Dead Island, Dying Light, the developers swapped over and whatever, and then now that this is finally coming over the finish line, Dying Light was last year. Dying Light's whole thing was, one of the promotional images said there was like 800 hours of gameplay or whatever, and it was obviously contingent on doing every side mission collectible, etc. This assumedly has those things, but it feels like overall this is designed to be finished, which is a miracle in the upper echelon space.
It is, and that's what I appreciate so much about it not being open world. Like, each of the spaces that you go to is full of detail, and there's a lot to explore, there's a lot to find, but it doesn't feel bloated. It doesn't feel like you're repeating content all that much until you get to later on in the game, but I'll get to that soon. And the amount of story missions you've got, I think it's 24 story missions, 33 side missions, and then some collectibles and some treasure hunts on top of that. I think I finished it in about 17 hours with about 10 side missions to go, so I didn't 100% it or anything like that.
In the words of Tuco Salamanca,
go on.
Tight, tight, tight.
Tight, tight, tight. It's a very tight experience. Overall, you might say that's maybe a little bit unambitious. It doesn't kind of like reach for the stars, as it were, in terms of, its ambitions mechanically or its ambitions from a storytelling perspective, but it's a tight experience in one that didn't have the bloat of a Dying Light 2. It's inevitable that I'm going to compare it to that game, but I was really disappointed by Dying Light 2. I loved the original. I thought the mechanics that they had in that game were just incredibly satisfying to use. I thought the story framing was really interesting, but then the sequel came along and it was bloated to high heaven. It kind of lost that focus, and Dead Island 2 has that focus, which is really really appealing to me.
By far the most fascinating thing. Like, you making a Last of Us comparison, I think is unbelievable. We never
I couldn't believe it. No,
that there would be that Dead Island would be getting compared to The Last of Us, and I think, like you said, the idea that it having a focus to it when it has these open world elements, the fact that they kind of refined it into the level structure. I know it's ridiculous praising it for remembering levels.
It's like games have levels. 10 out of 10.
This used to be a thing where games were designed to be finished and levels were designed to be combed and seen and replayed. I personally, ironically, that works as a breath of fresh air in 2023.
No, it really does. Like, it's old school in structure. And while that might make a game feel dated, it doesn't in this case. It's like it's past that uncanny valley where it doesn't feel like it's a game that was 5 years out of date. It feels like a game from 10 years ago, but because we have so few of those, it actually really works. It actually is really satisfying to get a more focused experience. Like I said, it's not amazing. What is there is just good. Like, you can't really call it a 5-star experience or anything like that, and that is partly down to the story, but I think just kind of like the core combat is very satisfying. We talked about good we talked about gore and blood and guts earlier on, in like, this is one of the most next-gen feeling games I've ever played.
That's a really good thing to say.
And that's really weird. I wasn't expecting that from Dead Island 2, but like I said, the kind of graphical fidelity on display is really satisfying. The game runs really well. I didn't have any hiccups in my time, which again, you probably shouldn't praise a game running well, but in 2023 that's kind of like the reality of it. So many games come out that like have really poor performance issues that shouldn't be there. This one just didn't have that, and that was a big surprise as well.
30 FPS knocking at the door every other day. They let me back in. You kicked me out for a while. No, I feel like it is very much worth praising that stuff. Like I said, I don't know if everybody else shares this, but I feel like there were very few expectations surrounding Dead Island. Obviously, Dead Island 1 is held up as one of the most, sort of mismarketed games ever. Tonally, there was that whole trailer with the story trailer that didn't really follow through in terms of the game itself. So this kind of, one of the things that's worked in its favor now is that lack of expectation. But I think that, I don't know, it's kind of cool when a game that you barely expect to be cool is actually brilliant and pretty recommendable.
Absolutely. Let me talk about the combat and the mission structure, because obviously the main thing you're doing in Dead Island 2 is battering zombies around the head with whatever you can find. And this, again, it's basic, but it is very well done, if that makes sense.
Okay.
You pretty much know exactly what you're getting from the first hour. You're going to be crafting, melee weapons. You're going to be adding on elemental attacks to those melee weapons. So you might have, a pitchfork that has a flamethrower on the end, essentially. So when you're jabbing these zombies, you're also setting them on fire. Elemental play to the combat is kind of at the heart of the overall experience. Cool. There's always, it's kind of like Bioshock, the original Bioshock, where there's always pools of water for you to, jab with a piece of electricity to set a bunch of zombies on electric.
You're speaking my language. Set them on electric.
Sense. Set them on electric.
I love it.
Or you've got like a pool of gasoline that you can ignite and set them on fire. Yeah. You've got this really like Mortal Kombat-esque fatality that you can do when you have this toxic gas, this toxic sludge that you can find in canisters, or again you can attach to your weapon, is that you can hit them with this toxic sludge, and when they hit the status effect, they will start walking towards you. You can sort of like just see their skin. Again, we can't show this on YouTube almost certainly, but you can just see their skin, peeling off their face, and their entire body disintegrating, and you're kind of like, maybe I've gone too far. Maybe civilization has gone too far.
It is a big year for detachable skin in 2023. Shout out to Dead Space's skin removal gun.
Yes.
But yeah, just say
exactly that. So like the combat is satisfying in that regard, but it's not going to get much more advanced than that. Like it is going to get a little bit repetitious, even though you are constantly getting new loot and you're constantly upgrading your weapons. The core of it is kind of the same, but it's a satisfying loop. The ability to take on these kind of more punishing infected that are stronger, that can like hit like a tank, getting in there and breaking their legs and breaking their arms so they can't be as effective does make for like more than just a brainless button smasher. Like, you can't just go in there, start swinging, and expect to get out the other end. You've got to utilize a bunch of different moves. You've got to utilize a bunch of different tactics, depending on the infected that you're fighting against, and it adds just enough flavor to the experience to kind of make it more than a brainless hack and slasher.
That feels like a nice evolution of like the way that Dead Island 1 was sort of sold on this whole limb targeting system, and you didn't need that necessarily. It always felt like Dead Island 1 was pretty easy to kind of get through. You mentioned a few negatives before. Anything that really drags it down?
It's kind of just like the mission structure, because like I said, it is a little bit repetitious in the combat, and a lot of the objectives that are in the game kind of amount to just kill them all. The amount of times I saw the objective kill them all in this game was kind of crazy, but it does offset that, like I said, with like the incredible level design, because at least you're killing them all in inventive new ways. Like, one of the best levels in the game is where you go to Monarch Studios, which is this kind of film set where you have a bunch of different films and TV shows being made. So you have a bunch of different sets. You have like one that is a war movie, so you're kind of at the top of the trenches and you're pressing mortar strikes to use the special effects to blow the zombies up. You've got
a zombie director?
There isn't a zombie director. You can be the zombie director if you want. You've got like this big spider that's in this sci-fi movie that's kind of spitting quote-unquote venom at the zombies, which is actually just water that you can then ignite. But using those special effects in that kind of scenario was fun, and it elevates those relatively basic mission structures, but it does kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, for as much as you've wrapped this in really nice patterns, what am I doing? I'm collecting a fuse, I'm killing all the zombies, and then I'm moving on to the next level before it kind of gets old. And unfortunately, the side missions don't deviate too much. There are some really frustrating side missions in here. One with a really cringy influencer person who's trying to get footage of your zombie killing antics to upload online to become famous, and it's like, I remember when we did that in Spider-Man.
Yes,
like
exactly what I was going to say.
And that kind of stuff feels a little bit dated, and that kind of stuff sticks out more because what you're doing within those missions isn't as fun or as varied as the main missions. So there are like drawbacks. Not everything you do will have the quality of that Monarch Studios quest, but there's a lot of those in there. There's a lot of those interesting scenarios in there that do elevate ultimately what you're doing.
That's good. I was going to say, does it feel like you had to rely on the side stuff overall? Does it feel that idea of AAA or upper echelon bloat? It kind of, to some degree, the way you've described it and like looking at the gameplay footage and stuff, it feels like because it's been handed between so many different devs, there's been so many delays and such a lack of expectation. At some point, they actually took hands off that from a publisher standpoint and just said, have some fun with it and make it work. But I don't know how many obvious elements are still kind of in there.
I mean, a lot of, I guess if you were like looking at a spreadsheet, There's a lot of safe bets in there. Like I said, there's a crafting system. You've got your weapon durability. You've got your side missions. You've got your collectathons. Like, all of that's in there. It's just, like I said, wrapped up in really nice wrapper. And your mileage will vary on that. I don't think it's a game that, like, everyone needs to rush out and play right now.
Right.
But if you're a fan of, if you're a fan of the franchise, if you're a fan of zombies, and if you're a fan of that kind of, like, apocalyptic media that's set right on the precipice of an outbreak, I think you'll have, like, a lot of fun with it if you just want something not quite brainless, but kind of brainless to go through, especially if you've got a friend who's up for it as well, because you can play the game in co-op. I think, like, you'd have a good time. I had a lot of fun with it, but I know it's probably one of those games that when it gets to the end of the year and we're doing, like, Game of the Year rankings, it's probably not going to be a contender for the top spot. But not every game has to be.
No, the way you've described it, and Jules was playing through this as well, he's just a bit busy today in terms of doing this review, but the way you guys have both described it, it sounds like just a fun little romp.
That's it.
I can go for a fun little romp right now.
That's it. It's almost like, again, it sounds like a backhanded thing to be like, oh, it's a fun little game because people spend so much time on it. But I don't think you can be far worse than a fun game. You know what I mean? You can be far worse than a kind of 7.5 out of 10 experience that almost gives you exactly what you want and nothing more. And it doesn't ask for 100 hours of your time. It doesn't ask for you to get 100% invested in daily grinds or anything. It's just a really cool zombie game with really cool levels in some wonky dialogue that you can have fun with. In that way, it's a lot like Dead Island 1. It's a lot like Dead Island 1.
It's a lot like what Dead Island 1 that necessarily it could have been or should have been. Any star ratings to round this out, my friend?
It's difficult. I'd probably give it, like, a 3.5 out of 5, a 7.5 out of 10, which might sound a little bit low, but like I said, everything it sets out to achieve, it more or less nails. It just doesn't have that kind of like next step of quality to make it a properly amazing game. But like I said, it's really recommendable, especially if you like this stuff. It doesn't have any kind of like major drawbacks in a way that another game might with technical issues or a mechanic that doesn't quite work or really boring sections.
Right.
Like I said, it's just like a tight, good experience.
I feel like sometimes some of your personal, a lot of our favorite games or a lot of people's favorite games are those sort of 6s and 7s that resonate on a more subjective level, but it feels like the mechanics are here, the foundations are there.
I will say, just before I wrap up, it's made me excited about a Dead Island 3. Hopefully it doesn't take 9 years to come out, but having played Dead Island 2, I've gone, right, this franchise has something, and I want to see how they build on this with a sequel, hopefully. I want to see how they kind of implement more weapons, implement more infected, build out those areas that are so great in the first game, build them out even more. And I do think there's like an expansion pass coming, so I will be jumping into that as well when that drops.
Give me more skin removal guns.
Give me more skin removal guns, and give me more acid that burns the skins off zombies, man. That's just so satisfying.
We'll get demonetized, but let us know what you think down in the comments below of Dead Island 2 if you've picked it up, or what you think of the overall IP, considering it goes all the way back to 2013. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I think Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.